There's a soft sound that happens in homes across the world every single morning. It's the gentle patting of paws on hardwood floors, the quiet jingle of a collar, the warm weight of a furry body settling against your leg as you sit with your coffee. For millions of older adults, this isn't just a pleasant moment. It's a lifeline. It's a reason to get out of bed when grief or loneliness might otherwise keep them there. It's a heartbeat in a quiet house. It's a responsibility that creates structure when days could otherwise blur together without meaning. And according to a growing body of scientific research, it might just be adding years to their lives. Welcome to Elderly Discoveries. Today, we're exploring one of the most heartwarming findings in gerontology and public health research. We're talking about the remarkable connection between pet ownership and longevity in older adults. This isn't folklore or wishful thinking. This is hard science showing measurable differences in cardiovascular health, mental well-being, physical activity levels, and mortality rates. Seniors who share their lives with pets, whether dogs, cats, birds, or other companion animals, are living longer, healthier, and more engaged lives than their peers without animal companions. The question isn't just whether this is true. The research has confirmed that repeatedly. The question is why. What is happening in the daily interaction between an older person and their pet that translates into such profound health benefits? Let me tell you about a man named Frank. Frank is 76 years old. 3 years ago, he lost his wife of 52 years to cancer. The grief was overwhelming. For months after her death, Frank barely left his house. His adult children called regularly, worried about his isolation and depression. They'd invite him to family dinners, and he'd find excuses not to come. They'd suggest he join a senior center or take up a hobby, and he'd politely decline. Frank had always been a social, active person, but the loss had hollowed him out. He would spend entire days sitting in his recliner, the television on, but not really watching it, eating whatever was easiest, not showering until his daughter insisted during her weekly visits. His doctor became concerned. Frank's blood pressure was climbing. He gained weight from inactivity and poor eating. He showed signs of clinical depression. Medication helped somewhat, but Frank was still just existing, not living. Then one afternoon, his daughter arrived at his house with a surprise. She'd visited the local animal shelter and found a 7-year-old golden retriever mix named Bailey. Bailey had been surrendered by an elderly owner who'd moved into a care facility. He was gentle, already house-trained, and according to the shelter, he needed a quiet home with someone who had time and patience. Frank's daughter had taken a chance, filled out the adoption papers, and brought Bailey directly to her father's house. Frank's first reaction was resistance. He said he was too old for a dog. He didn't have the energy. It was too much responsibility. But Bailey walked right up to him, sat down, and rested his head on Frank's knee with soulful brown eyes looking up. And something shifted. That night, Frank didn't sleep in his recliner as he'd been doing for months. He made up a bed for Bailey in the corner of his bedroom, but by morning, the dog was curled up on the rug beside Frank's bed. And when Frank woke at 6:30 because Bailey needed to go outside, he got up. He had to. For the first time in months, he had a reason to get out of bed at a specific time. He shuffled to the back door in his robe and slippers, let Bailey out into the yard, and stood on the porch in the cool morning air watching him. Bailey came bounding back, tail wagging, and looked at Frank expectantly. Frank realized the dog was hungry, so he found the bag of food his daughter had left, measured out a bowl, and while Bailey ate, Frank made himself breakfast for the first time in weeks. Not just coffee and toast, but eggs. Because if he was feeding Bailey, he should feed himself properly too. Within a week, the structure of Frank's days had completely changed. Bailey needed to be walked, so Frank walked him. Just around the block at first, Frank moving slowly, and Bailey patient beside him. But walks became a routine. Morning and evening, every single day, regardless of weather or how Frank felt. And during those walks, neighbors would stop to pet Bailey, to ask his name, to chat with Frank. Conversations that hadn't happened in a year suddenly became daily occurrences. Bailey was a social bridge, giving Frank a reason to interact with the world again. The dog needed grooming, so Frank had to leave the house to take him to the groomer, where he'd wait and chat with other pet owners. Bailey needed vet checkups, needed his nails trimmed, needed toys that Frank would browse for at the pet store. But more than the structure and the forced social interaction, Bailey provided something even more fundamental. He provided unconditional presence and affection. When Frank felt the weight of loneliness pressing down, Bailey was there. When grief ambushed him unexpectedly, Bailey seemed to sense it and would press close. The house was no longer silent. There was the click of nails on the floor, the soft snoring from the corner, the jingle of a collar. Frank wasn't talking to an empty room anymore. He talked to Bailey, told him about his day, about his late wife, about memories. And Bailey listened with patient, loving attention that asked for nothing but offered everything. Over the course of a year, Frank's health markers completely transformed. At his annual physical, his doctor was stunned. Frank's blood pressure had normalized. He'd lost 15 pounds, not through dieting but through daily activity. His depression scores on a standard questionnaire had improved dramatically. His resting heart rate was lower. He reported sleeping better. He was eating regular meals. And perhaps most remarkably, Frank told his doctor that he felt like he had purpose again. He had someone depending on him. He mattered to Bailey, and that sense of being needed had pulled him back from a very dark edge. Frank's story is not an isolated anecdote. It's supported by substantial research. A comprehensive Swedish study followed more than 3 million people over 12 years, comparing health outcomes between dog owners and non-owners. The results were striking. Dog owners had a significantly lower risk of death from cardiovascular disease and from all causes. Among people living alone, which described Frank perfectly, having a dog was associated with a 33% reduced risk of death and an 11% reduced risk of heart attack compared to single individuals without dogs. The benefits were particularly pronounced in older adults. So what are the mechanisms at work here? First, there's the physical activity component. Dogs need to be walked. Even for people who might not be motivated to exercise for their own health, they'll do it for their dog. And that daily walking, even if it's just 15 or 20 minutes twice a day, has profound cardiovascular benefits. It lowers blood pressure, improves circulation, helps maintain healthy weight, strengthens muscles and bones, and reduces the risk of falls by improving balance and leg strength. The regularity is key. It's not sporadic exercise when motivation strikes. It's consistent daily movement, which is exactly what older bodies need. Second, there's the social connection factor. Pets, especially dogs, are what researchers call social catalysts. They create opportunities for interaction that wouldn't otherwise occur. People stop to talk to dog owners. Dog parks and pet-related activities bring people together. These casual, low-pressure social interactions combat the epidemic of loneliness that affects so many older adults, particularly those who've lost spouses or whose families live far away. And loneliness isn't just emotionally painful. It's physiologically dangerous. Chronic loneliness has been shown to increase inflammation, raise blood pressure, weaken immune function, and increase mortality risk to a degree comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Pets buffer against that isolation. Third, there's the psychological benefit of purpose and routine. For people transitioning into retirement, dealing with loss, or facing the identity challenges that come with aging, having a living creature that depends on you provides structure and meaning. You can't stay in bed all day when a dog needs feeding and walking. You can't neglect your own well-being entirely when you're responsible for another life. Pets give their owners a reason to maintain routines, to stay engaged, to keep going even on hard days. Fourth, there's the stress reduction and emotional regulation that comes from interacting with animals. Studies have shown that petting a dog or cat lowers cortisol levels, the body's primary stress hormone, and increases oxytocin, often called the bonding or love hormone. This isn't just feeling good. It's measurable biochemical changes that affect heart rate, blood pressure, immune function, and mental health. The simple act of stroking a cat's fur or scratching a dog behind the ears creates a physiological relaxation response. Fifth, pets provide what psychologists call non-judgmental companionship. They offer affection and presence without criticism, without complicated emotions, without the social anxieties that can come with human relationships. For someone dealing with grief, health problems, or feelings of inadequacy about aging, a pet's simple, unconditional love is profoundly healing. Now, it's important to acknowledge that pet ownership isn't right for everyone. It requires physical capability, financial resources for food and veterinary care, and appropriate living situations. For some older adults, especially those with severe mobility limitations or cognitive impairment, the responsibility might be overwhelming rather than beneficial. But for those who can manage it, or who can manage it with some family support, the evidence suggests the benefits far outweigh the challenges. And it's not just dogs. While dogs provide the most structured activity through walking requirements, cats, birds, and even fish have been shown to provide companionship and stress reduction benefits. A cat curled up in your lap provides warmth and comfort. Watching fish in an aquarium has been shown to lower blood pressure and reduce anxiety. The key element seems to be the presence of another living being that you care for, and that provides some form of responsive interaction. So what does this mean for you or for an older adult in your life? If you're considering pet ownership, or if you're a family member thinking about whether it might help an aging parent, there are some practical considerations. First, match the pet to the person's lifestyle and capabilities. An high-energy puppy is probably not appropriate for someone with limited mobility, but a calm, older dog from a shelter might be perfect. A cat might be ideal for someone in an apartment. A bird or small pet might work for someone with very limited space or physical capability. Second, consider adoption from shelters or rescue organizations. Older animals often make the best companions for older adults. They're typically calmer, already trained, and their personalities are known. Many shelters even have senior-to-senior adoption programs with reduced fees. Third, ensure there's a support system. Family members or friends should be prepared to help with transportation to vet appointments, to step in during illness, or to provide backup care if needed. Some communities have pet support programs specifically for seniors. Fourth, consider the financial aspect realistically. Pets require food, routine veterinary care, and occasionally unexpected medical expenses. Make sure these costs are manageable, or investigate programs that provide assistance with pet care costs for seniors. Fifth, if full-time pet ownership isn't feasible, consider alternatives. Some people volunteer at animal shelters, getting regular animal interaction without full-time responsibility. Some programs offer visiting therapy animals. Some communities have pet-sharing programs where people can spend time with animals whose owners need occasional help. Frank didn't know when his daughter brought Bailey home that day that she was potentially adding years to his life. He just knew that the house felt less empty. The days felt less endless. He had a reason to get up, to go outside, to interact with the world. Bailey didn't cure Frank's grief. The loss of his wife will always be part of him. But Bailey gave Frank a path forward through that grief. He gave him daily purpose, physical activity, social connection, and uncomplicated love. And in doing so, that gentle golden retriever did what no medication or well-meaning advice had been able to do. He brought Frank back to life. The research is clear, and the stories are countless. Pets aren't just pleasant additions to the lives of older adults. They're powerful interventions with measurable health outcomes. They're furry, feathered, or fin companions that provide structure, purpose, activity, connection, and love. And in return for food, care, and affection, they might just give their older owners the most precious gift of all: more time, more health, and more reasons to embrace each new day. Thank you for joining us on Elderly Discoveries. Here's to the healing power of companionship, the joy of wagging tails and purring contentment, and the remarkable ways that loving a pet can help us live longer, healthier, and infinitely richer lives.